I feel very honored to be here, and I first want to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to moderate this stellar panel of speakers. So in this session, what we are going to do is we're going to focus on the theme of progress and challenges of implementing the Global Compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration, and the Colombo process in South Asian context. South Asia in the context of preventing, combating, and eradicating trafficking in persons with regards to migration. So I think we heard a lot and a good context setting by the previous speaker. And we all know undoubtedly migration is a critical facet of the South Asian economies, all economies alike. So on the one hand, we have a large regular outflow of migration going out of the region. It could be intra-regional or out of the region to other countries. It could be in the form of students, workers, temporary or permanent migrants, regular or irregular migrants. Many dynamics are ongoing. And then also we have a large inflow of remittances coming in. As it was mentioned, India ranked first last year with the humongous amount of remittances coming in. I think that's more than the GDP of Sri Lanka. So it's a lot of money coming in. And then we also have the associated socio-economic positive impacts of migration and remittances, as well as the negative impacts of migration and remittances coming in. So when there is a desire to migrate, and then the socio-economic factors in the country of origin serves as push factors, there are factors in the countries of destination. Most often the rules and regulation, they work in a restrictive manner. So when this push and desire to go and the restrictions on the countries of destination work together, it creates a limit on the amount of people who can go. This limit creates a desire to go through irregular channels, become illegal immigrants, or try to pay smugglers and go into other countries. So there is a very thin line between people paying money to go to another country and falling victim to trafficking, because they think they're paying money to go very safely overseas, but at the end what happens is they often become trafficked victims. So trafficking takes place, as it was well articulated in the previous session. It could be most often during the recruitment process for foreign employment, and it could be among displaced individuals, displaced due to conflict or climate change, and also trafficking occurs when people are vulnerable due to socioeconomic conditions also. So it could be they end up in forced labor or like enslavement, or they could be in commercial sex or prostitution industry, or for forced marriages or child labor situations also. So with this background, we know that at the regional level, we have the certain consultative processes, the global level processes. So the GCM, or the Global Compact for Migration, which I call it short, GCM, has, which came into life in 2018, has 23 objectives. And one of its specific objectives, Objective 10, specifically focuses on preventing and eradicating trafficking of people. And then also some of the other objectives also complement this prevention of trafficking, such as Objective 2, which focuses on minimizing adverse drivers and structural factors that compel people to leave their countries, and Objective 9, which focuses on strengthening the transnational response to smuggling of people. And while the GCM is working at a global level, we have the Colombo process, which came to life in 2003, working at a regional level. And some of its focus on trafficking has been through the protection of and provision of services to migrant workers, and optimizing the benefit of organized labor migration for both sending and receiving countries. So with this brief background and the very comprehensive stage setting that we have, let's move on to our session, where we will be focusing on how GCM and the CP, the Colombo process, helps eradicating trafficking in the region. So the format is going to be, we are going to have 2 rounds of speaker interventions. one of our speakers are going to join virtually. After that, there will be a second round where I will ask some brief follow-up questions, and then we open the floor for the audience to engage with us. Okay, so I would like to start with Mr. Inzaf Nizam. Mr. Inzaf Nizam is a specialist in fundamental principles and rights at work at the ILO South Asia. So what I would like to pose the question to Mr. Nizam. So we know there is a lot of debate going on around irregular migration. Some call it irregular migration is a criminal offense. Some call it an administrative offense. And in this context, I would like to ask you, what evidence-based policy measures can be employed to successfully balance national labour market interest with the rights of irregular migrants and asylum seekers, and how can these be applied within South Asia? Your time is 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bilesha, and thank you to the organizers and the esteemed panelists here, and also my greetings to all the participants. I think one of the key things that came out from Dr. Bhattarai's presentation in the previous session is how much labor dynamics, labor conditions impact on migration, because most of the migration happens because of labor issues. We also have crisis or distress migration, which happens due to asylum, the conflicts, disasters, etc. But eventually, labor becomes a key part of the solution to addressing these issues, and this is why the work on that aspect becomes extremely important, right? When there is a situation of undocumented migration or refugees, asylum seekers, large influx of foreign migrant workers, etc. One of the things that we need to remember is that prevention is the best cure, right? Prevention is the best cure. Why did that anomaly occur? Why do people risk their lives to migrate, to go from one country to the other? What were the conditions that pushed them to that situation? So those things have to be addressed, whether it is economic situations, economic conditions, etc., or whether it is crisis or conflict, or even when you take South Asia, many countries have registered growth in their economy, right? Most of the countries, I would say, except for a few. But then why are we talking about high levels of poverty and even educated migrants trying to look for other places and under distress, not as a development or a path of choice for their next step in their career, but because of lack of hope in the countries that they are living. So those elements have to be addressed first. And providing decent work, ensuring decent work, and conducive human rights conditions, right, comes as the first step to preventing distress migration and vulnerability. So that aspect, how to promote decent work and provide human rights. Human rights comes first, as it's paramount, and everybody, every human being is entitled to safety, protection, dignity, and respect. So if those conditions are not met, then they try to migrate, right? So first and foremost, human rights and decent work have to be established or strengthened in the countries of origin. So that is a very important goal. The ILO, of course, is part of the Global Compact on Migration. It's participating agency in the Bali process, the Colombo process, etc., and has been highlighting this important aspect of decent work, promoting human rights and fundamental principles and rights at work in the process. It has also come up with a number of international standards on labor, as well as supporting other international standards like the Palermo Protocol. Now, ILO's recommendation 205 talks about migration, talks about decent work in crisis situations, how decent work can be a solution and a pathway to achieving social justice. When you talk about social justice and connecting it to prevention, right? As I mentioned, many countries in our region also record growth, but uneven growth is not helpful. Growth has to be equitable, even, and the dividends of growth have to reach all tiers of the population. So if growth is not equal, and if only some people benefit from growth, then the tendency definitely would be for aspiring, particularly young individuals, to try and find better places at great risk and at the cost of getting trapped in human trafficking situations and forced labor. By the way, the Asia region records the highest numerical number of people in forced labor, according to the 2022 global estimates on forced labor, human trafficking, and modern slavery. Now, the other aspect is about perception, right? The perception has to be addressed. It's a very important issue because a lot of migration, I would say, a significant portion of migration, particularly distress migration, which leads to human trafficking, happens not because of the lack of opportunities, but also because of the perception of lack of opportunities, that they don't have a future in the country that they're living, in the situation that they are going through, that they don't have a future. So therefore, in order to build a future, they see that the only way is to regularly or irregularly migrate, right? So these perceptions occur when, of course, when governments cannot ensure that the growth that they experience is equally and equitably distributed among the populations, but also when media reports, for instance, when issues come up and they are not taken in a proper course of action is not taken when issues come up. So these get highlighted, and then it exacerbates the perception. Now, when in the case of asylum seekers and migrant workers, undocumented migrant workers, it is also important to look at them as a valuable human resource, right? To how to absorb them into the economy. Now, if a large number of migrant workers come into a country, it is not necessarily, they might live in camps, they might live in restricted conditions, but it doesn't mean that they lack the skills to contribute to the country in which they are seeking asylum or seeking refuge. Therefore, it is up to the country that hosts, together with to embrace the new situation. The faster you embrace the situation and plan ahead, it is better, and you can get more dividends, right? A humanitarian situation can be turned into an opportunity for economic growth if proper planning and a proper attitude towards incoming migrant workers, as well as even refugees and asylum seekers, can be obtained. Thank you.
Thank you for keeping to time and for those very interesting aspects of bringing in the social justice aspect and the decent work aspect into the trafficking discussion. Next, I would like to engage with Professor Binod Kadria, who will be joining us virtually. Thank you, Professor Kadria. So we know labor migration is a very important aspect in South Asia, and there's a big corridor going from South Asia to the Gulf region. So in this context, Professor, I would like you to give your thoughts on how have the structural inequalities, which was also mentioned in the previous stage-setting discussion, such as gender inequality, caste-based vulnerabilities, and informal employment, impact the realization of objectives of the GCM in this region. Over to you, and you have 10 minutes, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm also using the PowerPoint. If it is visible, people can refer to that.
It is visible to us.
Yeah, it is visible. Okay. So, well, I'm very conscious of the time, but I must thank you for the brief, and also to the host, Bidhan Singh ji, who, because of his inspiration that I am at this hour speaking from the US, you can imagine the time difference here. I think the context has been very well presented for us to have a discussion on GCM, and in terms of what you have just raised the question in terms of implementation, so particularly in the context of Gulf countries migration, and that's why I'm showing this table, which is 2023 data on Indian migration to the Gulf countries. 9 million NRIs are in the Gulf countries, whereas in the developed countries, they are mostly, the larger numbers are PIOs, persons of Indian origin. They have become citizens of those countries. So I think it is still within the domain of the Indian policy that the NRIs need to be looked after, and they are vulnerable to trafficking in terms of what I'm going to elaborate further. And this is the global picture of the bilateral migration corridors. I don't have to dwell on this, except to mention that 2 of the 20 largest corridors are India, GCC countries, UAE, and India, Saudi Arabia. I would like to begin by saying that as for the progress, which is for this session, I think the progress is always relative to the challenges or the targets that are facing us. And it is here that our activists and advocacy groups are monitoring these progress very appropriately, particularly in the context of the GCM objective of number 10, anti-trafficking, and I think one of the panelists is going to focus on this. So I'm not going to do that. I am dynamic part to the advocacy. I would limit to understanding and examining the challenges of meeting the GCM objective 10 against trafficking of migrants. And it's here that I have sometimes wondered whenever the discourse comes about trafficking, then I wonder what is the relationship between traffic and trafficking. Why is it called trafficking? And so I looked up and I found that this is because the vehicular traffic, the mode of transport, these are the hubs of trafficking. This is where most of the transactions take place. And then the mobility, the migrants are taken away by these vehicles. So it is as simple as that traffic and trafficking are interconnected. And it is different from human smuggling. The objective 9 that you had just mentioned, which is about smuggling, is the element of exploitation, the compulsion, the the force that is applied. Whereas in the case of smuggling, it can be self-smuggling in terms of voluntarily offering to be smuggled, to go in the back of the trucks and so on, and taking the risk of dangers. So the challenge, if we have to look at challenge, then I look at from the academic lens, I would say that one of the important challenge is identification of trafficking by type of exploitation, and it is already mentioned in the context also. And our previous speaker also mentioned about it, that there are two major types. One is the sexual exploitation, and the other is labor market exploitation. And this is where we have domestic work, the forced and fake marriages, and on the other side we have temporary migration, temporary employment, low pay, perk, pension, and wage theft, which has been adopted. The term which was given by the MFA has been adopted by the IMRF in 2022. But these are not mutually exclusive; they are overlapping. That's very important, and that's why I have tried to look at it in terms of a matrix where there's a triple whammy of gender, caste, and informal employment that you asked me to look at. I think we can look at a 3 by 3 matrix where sometimes the gender is more important than caste, and caste is more important than the 3D jobs, dirty, difficult, and dangerous jobs. And then you can have a combination of these in terms of these matrices. So the victims are women, men, children, transgender, LGBTQ, lower caste, subcaste, and then we have service workers, bonded labor, child labor, and the whole list can be drawn up in terms of disaggregating these categories. So if we look at preventing, combating, and eradicating as the objective 10, then while the challenge of preventing and combating are pragmatic, we need to understand that eradicating trafficking is a very tall order. It is not comparable to preventing and combating. Eradication is like, eradication of the smallpox. Disease can be eradicated, but this kind of a crime is very difficult. It can be minimized. And this is where, interestingly, I am reminded of Arthur Conan Doyle had his famous crime buster protagonist Sherlock Holmes saying, "When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." This is a fallacy. This is a very famous fallacy of Sherlock Holmes, that we are still left, there's a leftover which remains. So we have to, the truth is that bits of trafficking is always going to remain with us. So this brings me to the second challenge of measurement of trafficking and its minimum limits. And it is where I will say that how the champion countries are going towards this in terms of having the approach of whole of government engagement, the whole of society engagement, but ironically, I say whether whole of migrants. My whole of migrants is not incorporated, despite my pointing out at the IMRF 2022 and at later consultations. I'm amazed that why this is not being done, and this consultation, this is central to this consultation today, that no one to be left behind comprise so many categories of migrants. And what is needed is a holistic approach to combating human trafficking and in the labor market or in the informality based world. By not limiting GCM objective 10 per se in isolation of other 22 objectives. The 5 of them have been listed by the hosts here, the organizers. But interestingly, objective 9 is not one of them. Vilesa, you mentioned this, and I also had noted it down that objective 9 should be the 6th one that the organizers should take into account. And one also has to cross the boundaries of the GCM, look at similar multilateral agreements. For example, the GCR, Global Compact for Refugees. They both were created at the same time, and we don't talk about GCR at all. That's very ironical. And I would say that we have 23 objectives in GCM. The GCR has 4 objectives, and at least 3 of the objectives are overlapping with trafficking issues. One also has to transcend the boundaries between the global south and the global north to face the challenges holistically. Like our previous speaker also mentioned, that the highly skilled or educated people are also subjected to trafficking, we need to look at, and he mentioned about the equitable growth, and this is where it is not a coincidence. You can see that I have used the word equitable here on the screen at the bottom, equitable adversary analysis. What I mean by that, we need to step into each other's shoes and look at the other side with sympathy, with empathy, and with those considerations. And for doing this, the contexts are available in terms of the 23 objectives of the GCM. Some are universal, some are country specific. The challenge is to choose wisely and delimit the universe of discourse for policy making and for action. Common goal of the GCM is safe, orderly, and regular migration. And this regular word is being challenged now. Why I'm saying this is that what is current, very topical, is the deportation of the illegal migrants from the United States, and in two batches of 104 and 119 in India. And I was listening to one of the so-called illegal immigrants, deported illegal immigrant, who was being interviewed, and he mentioned the kind of treatment that was being given to them. So it is, I think, highly topical that we need to understand why there is this reversal of the terminology itself, that we have stopped calling irregular migrants as irregular migrants, but calling them illegal again. So that, I think, is something which has to be understood. One need to zero in
Professor.
on
I think
one
your
of
time
the
is
few.
up.
Okay, thank you. So
Yes,
I
thank you
say
very much.
that 23 club, some of them have to be clubbed, some broken down, and then find the time horizon, whether now or later or in the long run. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kadria. So you brought out two interesting challenges that we face here, that is the identification and measurement, and also the overlap between R was highlighted, which is very interesting and valuable. So with that, next I turn to Mr. Navraj Sapkota from the National Human Rights Commission in Nepal. Mr. Sapkota, we know that the Colombo process has been in existence since 2003 as a regional cooperation mechanism. So could you please share with us any specific instance of cross-border coordination by your country or any South Asian country or countries that has effectively addressed trafficking risk? Over to you. You have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Moderator. All the distinguished panelists, all the delegates from different countries of South Asia. Basically, most of the things in Nepalese context have been covered by the two of the speakers in the previous session. Joint Secretary Rajendra Sir from OPMCM and Dr. Prakash Bhattrai, one of the key presenter of this session. Basically, I focus on the two different modes of collaboration which are going on in Nepal. One is informal collaboration, that is with the civil society organization, the people living in the different countries, where different destination countries. The first one, and next one is the formal collaboration, that is G2G collaboration, the first one, and next one is the NHRI's collaboration. As I'm working in the National Human Rights Institutions of Nepal, my basic focus will be on the NHRI's collaboration for the prevention of trafficking as well as other human rights violation during the migration process. The first thing, in many of the countries, the government has either concluded MOU or other types of formal agreement, that is government to government. And next one is we even, National Human Rights Commission even have formal collaboration with some of the destination countries for the protection of rights of the migrants. For example, in South Korea, it was concluded in the past, but now it is G2G. Therefore, we have not concluded or renewed that previous collaborative agreement. In Qatar, as well as in Malaysia, the collaboration or MOU is effective now, and we are collaborating with those NHRIs. Without the formal agreement too, informally as well, we collaborate with the NHRIs in the destination countries. For example, in case of India, if the Nepali migrant worker or Nepali worker reported the violation of different rights, we directly write to the National Human Rights Commission of India. They monitor the situation, they investigate the situation, and based upon that monitoring and investigation, they recommend the government to provide compensation to the victims. And even in few of the cases, we have succeeded. That is one experience. And with regard to my experience, in case of Malaysia, there is in Colombo process, there is one component of working group is that they can work for the skill and qualification. That is one of the important area. And next area is the orientation to the migrant workers. As I have observed in Malaysia, many of the migrant workers from the country of origin, or let's say South Asia, they don't have that much idea with regard to the compensation on different kind of injuries they got during their work, or they are related with the workplace-based safety. There is one organization called Perkeso in Malaysia. This organization provides 11 different types of compensation in the injuries, but most of the workers in working in Malaysia, they don't have that much idea with regard to the compensation they get. There is a problem. And is one of the most important component of Colombo process is the proper orientation to the would-be migrant worker in the country of origin. In South Asia, that is not properly handled, as I observe. In case of Nepal too, and in case of other countries too. This is the another area that we can collaboratively work with the destination country as well as country of origin. And with regard to the National Human Rights Institution, it goes beyond the South Asia. We have Asia Pacific Forum of National Human Rights Institution that comprises of the 26 National Human Rights Institution across Asia and Pacific. It also supports us. It also supports our for protecting the rights of the migrant worker. They also somehow monitor the situation of the rights of migrant workers and make accountable to the government or other recruitment agencies as well as the different companies. That is also one of the important area that we can jointly work on. And with regard to the other collaborative area, there is also one working group that is provisioned by the Colombo process that is also functioning. Individual country can collaborate with that working group too. That is also one of the important area that all the nations can collaborate with. And in addition to this, even in South Asian context, we do have one convention. Nepal is also the state party to that convention. Related with the prevention of trafficking, that also provisioned one task force. But I have, unfortunately, the committee, the task force is not that much functioning nowadays, that we have to see such things too. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Subkota, for keeping the time also. So it was very interesting to know how Nepal involves in informal collaborations through the CSOs as well as formal collaborations through G2G agreements and MOUs. So I will come back with a question on it a little later. Now I would like to turn to Ms. Deepika Naruka. I hope I pronounced your name properly. She is at the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime. So I know recently the UNODC brought out the global report on trafficking of persons in 2024. Can you please outline some key global trends in trafficking in persons that is going on right now? Thank you. Yes, please feel free. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Namaskar, Ayubhavan. And first of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for giving UNODC this opportunity to be a part of this very important consultation. और मैं कुछ participants से जो पीछे बैठे हैं उनसे माफ़ी भी मांगना चाहूँगी कि मेरा presentation English में है, but I think there is some translation which is happening here. So, in the earlier speakers have already laid out the context of what's happening in South Asia and within some of our countries. So what I'm going to do is just lay out a framework of where South Asia fits in when we are looking at global trafficking trends. So UNODC, as Dr. Vilesha mentioned, comes out with a global report on trafficking in persons. The last report came out very recently towards the end of December 2024. So in the interest of time, I just have 5 or 6 key points from that report, which are going to be important for today's discussion. So I'm going to request for the next slide, please. If you just look at the slide which is in front of you, so what we have seen in the UNODC report is, if you look at the data from 2022 and compare it with data from 2019 during the COVID pandemic, then there's a sharp increase in the numbers of victims detected for trafficking, and the number has gone up to 25%. But if you look at the same data of 2022 and compare it with 2020, then the spike is even more, and it goes up to 43%. The other thing that we are seeing is that this increase is reported in almost all of the regions globally, and the preliminary analysis of 2023 data has started, and we are seeing similar trends being echoed in the new numbers as well. Next slide, please. Point number 2 is that number of child victims detected have increased. So increasingly, the number of children being detected as trafficking victims has risen again in all parts of the globe. If you look at the figures from 2020 and figures from 2022, the increase is about 31% to 38% when we are talking about child victims. And globally, the boys and girls being trafficked show a different pattern of exploitation. So what you see in the circular figures in front of you, the left circle, it shows the exploitation of boys, and about 47% of this happens for other forms of exploitation, which can be forced beggary, forced criminality. And the orange that you see on top is 45% is trafficking for forced labor. On the right circle, you see trafficking for girls. About 60% of the girls being trafficked are for trafficking for sexual exploitation, and about 21% for trafficking for other forms of forced labor. Next slide, please. Right. So what we see is as point number 3 is that trafficking for forced labor is on the rise. Now, this is something which was brought out also by the earlier speakers, but UNODC also sees that the convictions, although the forced labor trafficking is increasing, the convictions are very, very limited. So if we look at between 2019 to 2022, the global number of victims detected for forced labor rose by 47%. Now, one point to highlight here is that this proportion has increased, but if you look at the convictions, again, the convictions are high in those cases which are related to sexual exploitation, so which is 72%. But in the case of exploitation for forced labor, the convictions are very low globally, so they are still about 17%. Trafficking for forced criminality, we are seeing increasing in many regions, and we've heard in newspapers and media reports in South Asia as well of migrants being forced, indentured into cyber camps in East Asia and being forced to into this criminality. We've also come across reports of youth from some of our countries being duped and sent to the conflict area in Russia and Ukraine, and deaths have also occurred. So these are relatively new challenges that we are seeing. Next slide, please. Unsurprisingly, as point number 4, women and girls continue to make up a majority of the victims which are detected worldwide. If you look at the bigger circle in front of you, the 2 orange colors, they depict the share of women and girls detected as trafficking victims. So 39% are female victims and 22% are the girl child. On the right side, you see trafficking by forms of exploitation. And for women, almost 66% is exploitation related to sexual exploitation. And for girls, also the numbers are very similar, with about 60% of the girl victims being facing sexual exploitation. Next slide, please. So what you see in this picture in front of you is the different trafficking flows globally. So in 2022, UNODC's research recorded at least 162 different nationalities that were trafficked globally to 128 different countries. Now, maps with the arrows here show the main detected transnational flows. And victims, when we are looking at South Asia, then victims from South Asia and East Asia were detected in all regions of the world. But what is also something we have to keep in mind, and again mentioned by the earlier speakers, including Dr. Bhattarai, is that most of the victims who are trafficked in South Asia happens within the borders or within the borders of the region. Next slide, please. Forced criminality, I will not go into this in detail. Next, please. So as I mentioned that in 2022, most victims globally are trafficked within national borders, with the numbers being about 58%. But what's interesting is if we look at the same figure for South Asia, we find that 98% of the victims identified in South Asia were trafficked within the region itself. So either from one state to another state within the country in South Asia or across border. So South Asian countries, again, we know serve as not just the source, but also the transit, also the destination. And some of the patterns are quite different to what we had seen, say, about a decade ago. So we have children being trafficked from India to Bhutan, from India to Nepal, and not just from Nepal to India. We are also seeing movement of young girls from Bhutan via India towards the Middle East. We are seeing movement of youth from India towards United States, but following a very convoluted path of going through Latin America, through the GCC countries and so on. And some of the other recent challenges that UNODC has come across is, again, mentioned by one of the speakers, of online facilitation of trafficking. And this is something that we are seeing not just in case of smuggling of migrants or trafficking in persons, but in fact in all forms of organized crime. So we are increasingly also seeing a convergence of different forms of organized crime, which means that victims of human trafficking in many cases are also forced to carry illegal drugs across the border. The same types of organized groups are using deep web and dark web, not simply to facilitate the movement of fraudulent migrants, but also using the same site for, say, wildlife trafficking and trafficking of drugs. So these are very new challenges that our law enforcement and criminal justice systems have to grapple with. Lastly, just as the last slide, I just want to point out that there was a questionnaire which was circulated in all the countries by UNODC during the data collection for this report. And the 5 key points that the civil society organizations themselves laid out for looking at this issue are that medical assistance, including mental health assistance to victims, is missing, is very necessary. Legal support is missing and needs to be focused on. Then very importantly, reintegration services, including training and income support so as to avoid re-trafficking of the victims, needs to be focused on. and of course, child protection. And what is very, very important in the case of South Asia as well is formalized repatriation services, because a lot of the time when we look at repatriation processes between India and the neighboring countries, a lot of it happens also under the good offices of the different NGOs. So it's high time that countries get together, MOUs which are already in place are implemented, and new MOUs are put in place. With that, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for perfectly keeping to your 10 minutes. That was very valuable. Now I turn to Ms. Vijaya Kumari Shrestha, Executive Committee Member of the Migrant Forum in Asia. So as a former migrant and an extensive worker with the migrants in the field, I know you have a lot to add. So I would like to ask, what are the barriers in South Asia that persist in preventing alignment of national priorities with GCM's 10th objective of preventing, combating and eradicating trafficking of persons in the context of migration? Over to you for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Good afternoon, and even I think it's good morning because we have participants online, dignitaries, delegates, my dear participants and my fellow panelists here. I'm really honored to be a participant and a panelist in this such an important consultation. And first of all, I would like to congratulate Association for Voluntary Action, Justice, Just Rights for Children, and GIZ for organizing such an important consultation. And it is a timely consultation because it's been more than 7 years that GCM has happened in 2018. And now is the time to review what we have done, what our governments have done, and a focus to the South Asian level, because South Asia is, as Dr. Bhattrais has mentioned, that it is a home to many of the migrants. And we are also a country of destination, but home to many migrants from South Asian region. This consultation is also going to be a pressure to our governments from the South Asian, what we have done after the GCM that has happened, especially we focus on the GCM objective 10, and to South Asian government, we are working for the implementation of the Global Compact on Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration. When speaking about the challenges and implementation of the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration Colombo process in our South Asian, in the context of preventing, combating and eradicating trafficking, we can see that lots of efforts has been done by our governments. We work for example, in Nepal, we work very closely with our governments, and we can see many of our friends, our CSOs in India, in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, in all these South Asian countries working very closely with the government. But what has gone wrong? Why are we not able to come up with the result that we are expecting in these 7 years? For example, Nepal government has approved for foreign employment, labor employment for nearly 110 countries. But we can see that our Nepali migrants has traveled for labor migration in more than 160 countries. And that is a big challenge, because when they are traveling to these countries, which is unexplored by our government, they are facing huge challenges. Because when they are traveling, because most of the countries are in the European countries, where they do not travel with labor permits, but they are traveling on visit visas and turning into undocumented migrants, where they have to pay a huge sum of money, which when they reach there, it's not as they think. It's only a dream that does not come true, because they cannot come back, return home, because they have spent a lot of money. In fact, they try to endure those situations, working there as undocumented workers, paid low, right? If they return, they are already in a huge debt that they cannot pay working in their own country. So that is another big challenge. And talking about gender responsiveness is still we lack gender responsiveness. For example, most of our South Asian countries, the barrier is the ban that the governments, Nepal government, Sri Lankan governments, India governments has put on women migrant workers. In Nepal, it's the domestic workers. In 2017, Nepal government, some of our parliamentarians visited Saudi Arabia. They saw the situation of women migrants there and immediately put a ban. And that ban has been lifted partially with 7 preconditions that Dr. Bhattrai also has mentioned, that is a level of impossible to come up with those preconditions, which means indirectly our governments asked with the ban, and ban is never a solution for safer migration or migration by choice. That is why trafficking is happening. This shows that our government is giving advantage, this opportunity to be trafficked. We have an open border. Nepal, India has an open border, and women are being trafficked. Agents are active, not only in Nepal, all over South Asian countries. So this is another big challenge that we have to address. Not only government of Nepal, but government of all South Asian countries. I think we have to come together. So that is another big challenge that our governments has to address. And with this, I would also like to put some forward some recommendations that we have come up as because our organization, we work on gender perspectives on women migrant workers issues. And women migrant workers face a bigger challenges because, as Dr. Bhattrai has mentioned, more than 50% of the trafficked are women. So why women? Because there are several, bans, several, challenges for women to migrate. Nepal being a country that is a signatory to CEDAW, and our Foreign Employment Act, Article 8, strongly says that there should not be any discrimination on the basis of gender. But why only women migrant workers are banned for migration? Why the government are not gender responsive? This is another big challenge for countries like us, who are bigger sending countries of domestic workers. And the demand of care work, domestic works in the global arena, where our government, our South Asian government, has to be more sensitive towards women migrant workers. So our recommendation is to have, we have to have a bilateral agreement that includes portable social protection, and minimum wage requirement should be established and monitored. Democratic rights for migrants should be ensured. Access to justice should be ensured by duty bearers, where we can see our labor attaches, our embassies, who are not really able to address these issues because country of destination, there are more the challenges for women migrant workers. Government should facilitate easy pathways for remittances and end visa system tied to specific employers. Sending money home is also another big challenge to end trafficking, right? And forced labor. And the other is access to information to address the digital divide should be ensured also. Government should ratify ILO conventions such as the ILO Convention 181, 187, 189, and 190. So these are all for the most vulnerable groups, the domestic workers. So if these conventions are ratified, maybe most of our challenges can be minimized. So, and the other is involvement of CSOs and trade unions in the national implementation plans for more effectiveness of the GCM, and challenges challenge the privatization of recruitment processes, right? Also, there's a need of stronger coordination and collaboration among the South Asian governments for the implementation of the GC Global Compact for safer, regular, and orderly migration. Sorry. So, and I also like to express in my final word, share that during the recent South Asian Asia Pacific Regional Review of the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration, our Joint Secretary, Nepal's Joint Secretary, also the spokesperson of Ministry of Labor and Social Security, expressed that Nepal will be the second country to ratify ILO Convention 189, and we look forward to that. And not only that, he also urged the other governments who are involved in that to ratify ILO Convention 189, because that is the convention for the most vulnerable groups, the domestic workers. With this, I would like to urge all our government from different countries in South Asian countries to come together, to coordinate and collaborate with more strongly to minimize this Global Compact on Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shrestha. And thank you to the entire panel for the first round. We have concluded the first round. So now I will go back in the same order in the second round to all follow-up questions. So I will start with Mr. Insaf Nizam, order that we went in. Mr. Nizam, you mentioned in your presentation that it's not because of lack of opportunities that people fall into vulnerable situations. It's the perception of not having a future or not having an opportunity. How can we successfully change this perception to prevent the risk of trafficking? You have about 2 to 3 minutes to respond, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I think one of the key things is to communicate. The policy discussion has to include people, include the population, including victims, including the general population, the young people, so that they also feel that something is changing in their benefit. If the population who are going to benefit from the policy changes are excluded from the discussion and the policy making process, they obviously feel a gap and they don't know what benefits those policy changes are going to bring. So therefore, the perception of not being included, that they are not going to get any benefit from whatever growth that the country is claiming to achieve, perpetuates that situation, exacerbates that situation, and reduces their hope in the possibility of accessing those opportunities. When you say accessing opportunities, again, I'm coming to another crucial point, which is access. Because existence of opportunities is not just enough. It has to be accessible. The opportunities have to be accessible to people. So we need to proactively work on how populations can access those opportunities. The populations that are in the country in your country, as well as the populations that you are hosting. How can they contribute to the process and get benefits from that process? So 2 things that I want to focus. There are many things that I can talk about, but just to be brief, definitely the point of giving more access to opportunities, not just the existence of opportunities, and then the inclusion of all stakeholders, including the expected beneficiary populations in the policy dialogues, right? Not to exclude them, not just to consult them at the time of an election, but then from one election to the next election, there are so many policies at the higher level, lower level. That consultation, that inclusion is absolutely essential. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Insaf, for that very eloquent response of highlighting the importance of accessibility and inclusion for these opportunities. Now I would like to pose a follow-up question to Professor Kadria. Can we get him back online, please? All right. Yes. So, Professor Kadria, you mentioned about identification of trafficking and the challenges in that. So, one thing we have seen is that often victims of trafficking are considered as criminals. This identification makes it very difficult for them to access services. So, in your opinion, how can we improve this identification so that trafficking victims are not penalized or they don't come forward further for support? You have 2 to 3 minutes for that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think extremely important issue. This is where I think the terminology is very important. In what categories these crimes are, so-called crimes should fall, whether they are crimes or they are deviations. If they are deviations, then we need to look into their, incidences in terms of stocks and flows. If they are stocks, like Mr. Insaf has mentioned, that you need to invest in their education and health and make them contributors to the growth of the economy. Because if they are stock, then you cannot them. Even if they are irregular or illegal migrants, they are called illegal migrants. You cannot just deport them unless you have that global power, where you can dictate the world. You cannot deport them. So then you have to make them economically beneficial to the economy, bring them to the mainstream rather than on the fringe, and contribute to the gross domestic product, pay tax, and so on. So that is, I think, what is important in terms of decriminalization of these categories of deviations from the norm. This can actually help in terms of bringing them into the fold of the fundamental rights. If they are citizens who are trafficked, then they should get the cover of fundamental rights by the country, not only moral suasion of human rights. Human rights don't teeth. Fundamental rights are justiciable. They can be questioned in the courts of law, and that is what works. You can see right now what is happening in the United States. All the executive orders are being questioned by the court, by the judiciary. That's where I think the power of the people can come and play an intervention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Kadria. As a follow-up question to Mr. Navraj Sapkota. So in your intervention, you mentioned very interesting informal and formal collaborations that's taking place in Nepal. Can you elaborate and explain how these informal collaborations across borders through the CSOs are happening? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I basically focus on the informal collaboration with the civil society organization in the destination country, the first one. And next one is the informal collaboration with the national human rights institutions in the destination country. For the first, National Human Rights Commission of Nepal basically contacts with the non-resident Nepali people who are living in the destination country, where our workers have faced a kind of problem or right violation. This is the first step we take, and we have been engaged with the non-resident Nepali. This is the one important forum, informal forum that we are using. And next one is, I would like to share one example. Before 2 years, one case happened. The 6 Nepali women who were taken to one of the destination country, they were in the transit country, and the police, the respective police of that country, applied torture to those 6 Nepali women. And we were informed by the civil society organization that Nepali women are being tortured in particular transit country. And we did not have a kind of MOU or a BLA with that respective country. And we directly write to the National Human Rights Institution of that particular country. And they immediately monitored the situation. And we, in collaboration with the Nepal government, especially the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we succeeded to rescue those 6 women and repatriate them in Nepal. That is also one of the example of informal collaboration, as I have shared in my previous session. Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting to know how the informal collaboration coordinates with the formal collaboration and successfully brought down the 6 victims. Now, I would like to ask a follow-up question from Ms. Deepika Naruka. So there was a lot of interesting trends that were brought about by you, and I would like to focus on the emerging trends of trafficking for forced online criminality. We see a lot of South Asian victims being taken to the East Asian countries. Do you see any changing trends in the future, in the near future, in the destinations, whether they will go into new countries or change in the countries of origins of victims? Over to you, 2 to 3 minutes.
Thank you very much for the question, Dr. Belesha. I think in one line, if we want to see the change, that is something which is in the hand of the source countries right now. And already the fact that there is awareness which is happening in the countries from which these youth are being trafficked to East Asia means that discussions have happened, cross-country collaborations have started. But what we need to remember is that, it takes a long time for awareness to trickle down from the top to the bottom. And it's very, very necessary when we are looking at South Asia that awareness is not just built at the policy paper level, but also with the law enforcement which is actually on the ground, with the customs officer which is at the airport, with the police officer who comes across these groups of youth who are being sent abroad. So I think if we do coordination, if we do awareness and capacity building, then we can definitely make a change. I think what is needed is a more robust understanding of these new technological advancements. This is cyber issues, artificial intelligence. These are new domains that none of us are actually ready to face. So at least giving proper trainings and information to the key agencies on the ground is going to be a start in the right direction. And also, if I can just take a few seconds to just echo what Mr. Nizam said, and also Professor Khadria and Madam as well, that I think it's very, very important to include the victims right from the beginning of the process itself, and not simply involve them at the end stage, because for prevention, it's very important that champions come out from within the victims themselves. And we are seeing organizations like Shakti Samuha, which are based here, which are present here, Ilfat, for example, from India. And I think when people see these champions rise up from their communities, that's when the perception of, of victimhood changes. And I think that's very, very necessary. In a consultation last week, some of the speakers were saying that migration is often seen as a problem and not a solution. And I think it's time that we change that perception. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very interesting response. And it is really true that the traffickers are so far ahead in their technology understanding, and the law enforcement is forever running behind technology to catch up with the traffickers. So something drastic has to be done, that the law enforcement is ahead of the traffickers so that we can address this in a successful manner. So coming to my last speaker, Ms. Shrestha, you mentioned that now in Nepal, there are 110 countries that's approved for labor migration, and the Nepali government, I'm sure, is providing services for them. But migrants end up going to 160 countries. So that means the people going to the extra 50 countries are not getting substantial services if they have any protection issues. Why isn't the Nepali government catching up, and what do you suggest they should do to catch up and approve another 50 countries so that migrants can get the support that they require?
Thank you for the question. Very important question. Actually, our governments are aware of that, and they are having a lot of programs, consultations involving migrants, and a lot of awareness involving the community level about this. But the thing is, agents are far more, in front, than the government and CSOs like us, Agents are everywhere in the community. Agents are everywhere. There are vulnerable women and men who are in need of job, right? So this is why we have to, as Madam Deepika mentioned, we need to work more on prevention. Because we are in search, because when we see the example, the returning migrants, because we work on women migrant workers, we look at the trend of migration. We note down their case studies, and when we ask them, returning from Saudi Arabia, for example, returning from Dubai, for example, when we ask them, said, are you going to remigrate? And they say, yes, I'm going to remigrate. I went to Saudi, but I'm not satisfied. I want to try for Dubai. So returning from Dubai said, oh, Dubai is like that. I want to try to European countries. There is more, dollar, there's dollar. And when we see, our case studies, our data shows that most of the victims, migrants, are from returning from Kuwait. But still they are victimized, in Kuwait, but still they are traveling to Kuwait. Why? Because of the money, because the Kuwait dinar is very big. That's what they say to us. And then returnees from Dubai, they said, I want to go to European countries. Maybe they are opting for Korea, for Japan, So this is happening. And this is a global issue that maybe like none of us can really, work on this. But when governments and civil societies like us and all private sector stakeholders come together, we will definitely, come to a solution one day, because this trend has just started and it is becoming a big challenge, because the visit visa is a big challenge that our government are working on it. We cannot say that our governments are not doing anything. They are doing, but because of our political instability, changing of our government, when we go to a minister from the labor, there is one person, and then next 2 months there is another minister there, and then we have to orient them from the starting, and then next 2 months there is another minister. So this is a biggest challenge for us. Even our secretaries also, there is a kind of changes, and we have to orient them. And when they start understanding them, they are in a different ministry, So that is the biggest challenge, and that is why I say that our governments are doing, we are doing, and we are involving migrants also. So as Ms. Deepika mentioned, we have to work from the community level to the global level, and vice versa, from the global to the community level, which is not happening that much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very, very realistic response to my question. And I think it's a perennial problem in the South Asian region that there is an issue of institutional memory when it comes to officials. They get trained in one field, but they get transferred in no time to another ministry, and then there is no institutional memory about how the agreements were made, how some rules were made, all right? So now with that, we close the 2 rounds with the panelists over here, and we open the discussion with the audience. So I respectfully ask all audience members to engage with the discussion, introduce yourself, and give us a brief question. I stress again, a brief question. We have about 15 minutes, and we would like to get at least 5 questions for all 5 panelists. So come with a question directed at a specific speaker. So I see one over there.
My questions are, I have already raised this question in another forum in Nepal, also in Lumbini, few days back. So these are my suggestions, and it is also a question to the policymakers that whenever we all are here for the same cause, for the children who are at high risk, who are at vulnerability. So why don't the agencies work plan for a common SOP in all the countries where the children are either residing in the homes or are at risk? Because it is often, we have also seen that the children are in the home, and whenever they are being trying to send back the homes, so there are some political norms that they don't require in other countries. So why don't our government just have a round table conversation with the neighboring countries that we all are discussing? And second is vulnerability mapping. So it is also done by the government itself, but the vulnerability of mapping of the families who are at risk, that should be done. So
right. Thank you. To whom are you posing the question?
Sorry?
Which panelist are you asking the question?
Anyone from the...
Anyone, okay. Second, third, fourth and fifth, okay.
सभी को नमस्कार, मेरा नाम दानिश है और मैं राहत ऑर्गेनाइजेशन किशनगंज बिहार से हूँ। एक्चुअली मेरा प्रश्न सर आपसे है कि पॉलिसी, जैसा कि किशनगंज इंडो नेपाल बॉर्डर पे है, बांग्लादेश भी बगल में है। अभी एक इंसिडेंट हुआ था कि बांग्लादेश की बच्ची, हम लोग यहाँ पे नेपाल श्रीलंका की बात कर रहे थे, लेकिन बांग्लादेश को लेकर के बहुत ज़्यादा चर्चा नहीं हुआ है। अब बांग्लादेश के साथ क्या रिलेशन है इंडिया का, उनके साथ हम लोग कैसे काम करते हैं, उस पर थोड़ा सा चाहेंगे सर आप रोशनी डालें। साथ ही साथ वहाँ पे जो रिपैट्रिएशन का बांग्लादेश के साथ जो प्रॉब्लम्स है उसके बारे में भी थोड़ा सा जानकारी दें। साथ ही एक और इंसिडेंट आपको बताएंगे कि हमारे यहाँ एक अफ़गानिस्तान की बच्ची आ गई थी, वो 16 साल की थी, और बांग्लादेश की जो थी वो माइग्रेंट लेबर थी, वो 20 साल की थी। उसको रेड लाइट पे ला करके यहाँ पे किशनगंज में भेज दिया गया था। CBI के माध्यम से हम लोग को पता चला था, तो फिर उनको रिपैट्रिएशन बड़ी मुश्किल से हम लोग CBI और गृह मंत्रालय के द्वारा करवाए। लेकिन इसमें सबसे ज़्यादा जो चैलेंज हम लोग को दिखा वहाँ पे कि हमें प्रोसेस नहीं पता है कि हम कैसे उनको रिपैट्रिएशन करेंगे। और दूसरा अहम चीज़ है कि क्या ऐसा कोई पॉलिसी है या पॉलिसी बनाने की आवश्यकता है सब देशों के साथ, और पार्टनर्स के साथ शेयर करने की ज़रूरत है उन पॉलिसीज़ को। तो इन पे भी हम आपसे रोशनी चाहेंगे। धन्यवाद।
तो हम पिछले 15 सालों से बॉर्डर पे काम कर रहे हैं, और पिछले 7 सालों से हम, जैसा कि सर ने बोला, हम SOP के लिए एडवोकेट कर रहे हैं वहाँ पे। हम लोगों ने सारी कोशिशें की हैं, हमारा एक नेटवर्क भी है, इंडो नेपाल संस्थाओं का नेटवर्क है। मैं यहाँ पे बिकॉज़ यहाँ पे UNODC से हैं, यहाँ पे ILO से सर हैं, ह्यूमन राइट्स कमीशन से सर हैं। मैं आपसे ये बोलना चाहती हूँ कि क्या SOP हमारा एक प्रायोरिटी अभी तक नहीं हो पाया है, और नहीं हो पाया तो क्यों नहीं हो पाया है, या फिर प्रायोरिटी है अगर तो क्या क्या चैलेंजेस हैं जिसकी वजह से हम ये SOP मटीरियलाइज नहीं कर पा रहे हैं। थैंक यू सो मच।
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I am Luba Nepane from Roem, Nepal. When we talk about the nexus of trafficking and migration, it is obviously the issue comes in country of origin and transit country and country of destination. So in this situation, in the South Asian region, so we are repeatedly feeling that a regional mechanism need to be established. Before, when SARC was active, so some regional mechanism was tried to establish and tried to work, like SAIBAG was working, yes, and is still working. Okay? But now SARC is almost dead. Yes. So in this situation, there are some regional advocacy agendas that we need to commonly raise in the global migration governance. Okay? So in this situation, what kind of regional platform or mechanism need to be considered to think or to work together, to tackle the migration governance, to raise our regional common agenda, yes, of trafficking and migration. So my question is maybe to Mr. Insaf, just to respond. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
If the word survivor can be replaced by the word called warrior, the fact is that because what I have seen, that they have undergone a lot of, you can say, pain, and they came out of that pain. In fact, they are like you and me, in fact, and they should be given ample of opportunities, and they should not be considered as a survivor. They are warrior. That is one thing. Second thing is that rehabilitation programs related to victims of trafficking should be more monitored, so that we can come to know at the end of the year that how many such children and women, in fact, they have been placed successfully in different domains. And the third thing which I want to place and focus on, that more foster families should be encouraged. They have every right to integrate it with the society and the families, which unfortunately is not taking place. And rest of the year, in fact, they are stigmatized and they are carrying this particular brand, or they have been branded in such a fashion that they are the victim of trafficking. So this is what the 3 things which I thought that I should raise in this prestigious platform. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
सर, मेरा नाम गंगा है। मैं उत्तराखंड अर्पण संस्था अस्कोट पिथौरागढ़ में बॉर्डर एरिया पे हूँ। नेपाल बॉर्डर वहाँ पे लगा हुआ है। तो हमारे यहाँ पे जो काफ़ी बच्चे और युवा वहाँ पे आजीविका को लेके आते हैं, जो कि आजीविका को लेके आते हैं, लेकिन उसमें छोटे बच्चे भी होते हैं और वो चाइल्ड लेबर के अंदर काम करते हैं। लेकिन वहाँ पे जो भी प्रशासन है उनको खाली वार्निंग दे के छोड़ देते हैं, ये नहीं कि उनको रेस्क्यू करें या उनको चाइल्ड मतलब उनका चालान करें। हमारे लिए बहुत चैलेंजेस है कि उनको एक बार वार्निंग देते हैं और छोड़ देते हैं, उसके बाद फिर से दोबारा बच्चा वहाँ से दूसरी जगह पे चाइल्ड लेबर करता है। दूसरा, बच्चियाँ भी वहाँ पे आती हैं वो ट्रैफिक होके और बाहर निकल जाती है। लेकिन हम लोगों का काम वहाँ पे बहुत ज़्यादा डेटा तो हमारा कलेक्ट नहीं है, लेकिन हम क्षेत्र में जो NGOs है, नेपाल के NGO और हमारे वहाँ पे SSB है, पुलिस है, उनके साथ मिलके एक जागरूकता का अवेयरनेस का काम हम वहाँ पे करते हैं। हमें काफ़ी चैलेंजेस वहाँ पे आते हैं इन मुद्दों को लेके। थैंक यू सो मच।
Thank you very much.
Most of the victims we are saving every day, not every day, most of the time in the border area. So how do we collaborate? This is any good practices, any formal system in between the formal and informal system. So it will be good for us because we are not authorized sometime to do many things. So if the voluntary sector authorized to do the many like a legal system, support and other rehabilitation processes, so is there any possibility in the bordering area?
I have a question for either Professor Binod or Vijaya ma'am. My question is pertaining to specifically visas, and you very briefly spoke about availability of visas for a lot of labor that moves. It's a reality today that labor is moving and it's not something that we can restrict or ban, right? So I was wondering if the conversation can shift a little towards restructuring visa regimes where getting visas is easier, and also because what happens in destination areas is the legal status comes into question, which also prevents a lot of people from accessing the criminal justice system if they get labeled as illegal immigrants. So I'm just wondering if there can be conversation around restructuring of visa regimes.
Hello, this is Prakash Chandra Modai from NITS, Nepal. We are from different country of South Asia region, and we have regional mechanism, SARC convention. But we never talk about the activation of SARC and the provision implementation of SARC convention on prevention and combating trafficking in women and children for prosecution 2002. Why should not talk about this? I asked this question all of the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, with that, we'll go back to responses from our panelists. So we will just have one round of response. You can collect a couple of questions and respond. I would like to start the responses with Professor Kadria.
Okay, thank you. I think very interesting questions, and I always tell my students in the class that not all questions have answers. You know, some questions have answers today, some will emerge, some will never emerge. But we need to keep asking questions. I think the one of the last questions is extremely important. Visa. Visa is the anchor of migration, but visa is the hot potato. Nobody wants to talk about it because the member states do not want to give their sovereign rights to the people or to the people of other countries. And that's why visa is never discussed in any forum. And that, I think, should be questioned now. And why I'm telling you, see, I interestingly, I share this, that every product or service that we consume or buy has an expiry date. And that expiry date is a guide for us to take our decisions, whether to buy that or not buy that. But visa regimes have no expiry date. You don't know when the visa regime is going to change. Whereas visa regimes actually steer the decisions of the families and migrants, which are naturally long-term, in terms of investment in education, in terms of specialization, in terms of going to the global labor market. All these are non-reversible decisions, whereas visas are reversible. So this is where the contradiction is. And I think this should be questioned. I'm very glad this has been raised. We should have a separate session on this. I have a couple of just others, one-liners.
Professor Kadria, you'll have to wrap up in a couple of seconds because we want all speakers a chance, all right? Thank you.
Okay, I'll just take one indulgence from you, and that is our co-panelist saying that the transfer of officers, is creating problem, the labor officers or the ministers or others. That is why I think the GCM, IMRF started having whole of government. Whole of government was for this region only, but it is only in name, it has not been implemented. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, I'll go to Mr. Insaf Nizam, collect the questions and provide a response in 2 to 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Bilesha. Very interesting questions. One or two I couldn't understand fully, but my colleague translated. Let me take the questions on regional collaboration. Now, it's a very important pathway to solving or addressing some of these issues. We have spoken a lot about SARC. But there is also an apex body of SAARC called SAIVAC, which some of you might know, right? Now, while the political layer of SAARC might be relatively less effective, now these apex bodies which are working on particular issues like child labor, child protection, violence against children, and human trafficking, keep on working in a very silent way or in a low profile way, doing a vital part of the job by bringing all these countries which might not really politically align on some of the big issues, but they can be aligned on less political issues when it comes to preventing of human trafficking, whether it is child labor or violence against children, etc. So I think one of the important initiatives is to strengthen these institutions, engage with them, and use their leverage to pursue some of these cross-border issues. Right? They have the potential. While big politics can take time to sort out themselves, these institutions, the apex bodies, which engage with the civil society, which engage with victim organizations, which also engage with UN organizations, continue to work and strengthen. I also connect that same response to the question on Nepal, India, cross-border child labor and child trafficking. Of course, there are issues. One, as I said, we can work on the preventive side. Secondly, we can use some of these platforms created by these regional bodies like SAIVAC to address those issues and pursue common solutions. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Next.
Basically, the three questions are directed to me. The first thing I would like to respond is that there are so many challenges in South Asia. They can comprise the practical challenges as well as policy level challenges. As Nepal is working for the domestication of the Palermo Protocol, as recently, before 2 years back, Nepal is a state party to the Palermo Protocol. The concerns that are raised during the Q&A sessions, I guess, can be addressed by incorporating those international standards in our domestic legislation. First question. Then second question, with regard to the vulnerability mapping, we are also mapping the vulnerability. If you go through the report that has been published by the National Human Rights Commission of Nepal, Trafficking in Persons report that is annually published, and that is available in our website. You can search and you can study that report. That also highlights some of the vulnerability and vulnerable areas in terms of trafficking. This is the next question. And I think problem lies in basically in South Asia in the policy level. We do not properly domesticate the international human rights standard into our domestic legislation. As if you have gone through the many treaty body recommendation as well as UPR recommendation, you can see most of the recommendations are related with the domestication of the international standards in the national legislation. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Ms. Deepika Naruka.
Thank you, Dr. Vilesha. Again, a number of very interesting questions and comments which came. I'll start with the one about regional collaborative mechanism in the absence of the existing SAARC mechanism, which is not really working. I think we can learn a lot from mechanisms which are in place for other forms of organized crime, like UNODC is involved with in the area of wildlife trafficking. There's an organization called SAVAN. So all the 8 member countries from South Asia are a part of it. So these are, adaptable practices that can be involved also in the case of safe migration and human trafficking. And Ravikantji and some of the organizations here were a part of anti-trafficking in persons platform that a few years ago UNODC along with UN Women and UNHCR and other UN agencies had put in place. And we were going to expand that trafficking persons platform to include more and more countries in South Asia, because while we await for the formalization of cross-border country level responses, I think operational responses are also equally important. Then Rahat NGO from Bihar, Uttarakhand से मैडम और देवयानी जी ने रेस किया था इशू रिलेटेड टू स्टैंडर्ड ऑपरेटिंग प्रोसीजर्स. तो आपको मैं बताना चाहूँगी कि मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ होम इंडिया ने के काफ़ी गाइडलाइंस हैं, काफ़ी स्टैंडर्ड ऑपरेटिंग प्रोसीजर्स हैं जो अलग अलग UN एजेंसीज़ ने बनाए हैं इंक्लूडिंग UNODC. सो आई थिंक व्हाट इज़ नेसेसरी इज़ कि जो SOPs अभी डिटेल में हैं उनका एक सिंपल गाइडलाइन, especially with NGOs, those NGOs which are working at the border, to have a simple checklist of what to do when they come across such cases of trafficking. तो आपको मैं invite करूँगी also the anti-trafficking unit, the cell within MHA. आप अपने सुझाव जो है UNODC को भी लिख सकते हैं और उनको भी, and also NHRC and MHA both have guidelines. उनकी guidelines हैं जो ऊपर websites पे भी available हैं, उनको आप देख सकते हैं. Lastly, there was a comment on integration and stigma, which I completely agree with. I think that's something that all of us, all of our countries grapple with, is the issue of stigma of victims of trafficking, and it's high time we rise above that. And again, I come back to the issue that also Mr. Insaf mentioned that they need to be seen as economically viable parts of the functioning society and not something which is excluded and for whom we are working. After all, they are our fellow citizens, and I think they should be a part of all these processes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Shrestha, 2 to 3 minutes, please.
Thank you so much for the very important questions, but most of the questions was not for me, so it's good. But still, I would like to, about the visa regime, I think Professor Kadria has really, given the answer, so I don't need to answer that. I agree to what he said. And about the other question, I don't have question, but that's word warrior really struck me with my experience, because I have been working in this sector for more than 24 years. So in 2006 and into 2004 and 5, the National Living Survey of Nepal said that out of the 100% of the GDP of Nepal, 11% of the GDP was contributed by the women migrant workers, in spite of the challenges. At that time, women were traveling with so much of challenges as undocumented workers. For example, when I see my own experience in working in Japan as an undocumented worker, I always, before, spending my money, I always used to think left behind children. I had left behind my 4 years old and 6 years old sons, and I wanted to save as much as possible, as fast as possible, so that I could go back home and spend, live with my kids, spend my time with my kids. So at that time, we in 2006 and 2007, we used to call ourselves the returning women migrant workers, Arthik Yodha. Arthik Yodha? Economic warriors. Because out of the 10% of women migrant workers from the National Living Survey, 11% of the GDP were contributed by the women migrant workers, despite the challenges they faced. So that is why we used to call ourselves the Arthik Yodha or the economic warriors. So I think the survivors, warriors, because at that time, media was attacking us, even governments were attacking us, that why these women are migrating to the Gulf countries? They want to, fly in the aeroplane, good aeroplane, nice roads, beautiful places, travel. That is not the thing. That is the need of the women migrant workers. We don't have job opportunities here. We face a lot of domestic violence. That is that is pushing us for the as undocumented workers. So we are the economic contributors. We are the economic warriors. Thank you.